it's a trial and error process. But then, more importantly, one of the things that was dear to me when we created Tetragram was giving patients the ability to not only journal their experiences, but share that with other people. So we had this whole community portion in Tetragram so that people can learn from each other and be like, oh, if you try this for sleep, well, maybe I'll try it for sleep because it at least has given me a head start into determining if that's going to work best for me.
What are you talking about?
Smoking in a bong or blunt.
Grass.
Dank.
Reefer.
Was is job it just means like pass the fucking joint.
Ganja.
Hash.
Fucking awesome.
Hello and welcome back to Exploring Cannabis and Exercise. This week I'm talking with Otha Smith III, who created an app called Tetragram. In this app, you're able to record what products you use and how they actually impacted whatever it is you are trying to get out of that cannabis use experience. I really hope that you enjoy this podcast episode. I think Otha is a wonderful person, and I cannot wait to have more conversations with him about research. So make sure you download the app, make good choices out there, and here we go. All right. Cool. So Otha, so good to see you again. We've had a couple of conversations over the past couple of months. We met at the Cannabis Research Conference in Colorado, where you were presenting and talking about Tetragram, and I was really excited about your product. And so then we started talking and realized that we have even more in common with cannabis and exercise. So I wanted to have this conversation start out with your own experience, your own background with cannabis and how you've used it in your own life, and then we can talk about the app. So
yeah, sounds good. Really happy to be here, Whitney. It was a pleasure meeting you in Colorado, and I'm glad we're here today.
yeah. So yeah, tell me more about, you grew up on the East Coast, and how was cannabis talked about when you were growing up?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C., about 30 minutes outside of D.C., about 45 minutes outside of Baltimore, in a very rural area of Maryland, about 15 minutes from Annapolis, if that rings a bell for anyone. So I grew up on like 3.5 acres of land. I didn't find out until years later that where I grew up was actually notorious for growing cannabis. Because all my neighbors, we all had at least 3, 4 acres of land. There's this farm behind us, behind where my parents lived, that was like 200 acres, and they were growing about 5 acres of cannabis when I was young. So
And when
I've
did
been
you
around.
know about this? How did you find out?
I found out when I was in high school because they actually got raided, and the people who got raided, I think they're still in jail today. I know they got like 20 plus years because it was such a massive grow. And
Oh my
it's
gosh.
Yeah, and it's so funny too, because when we were kids, the way my parents' house is positioned, like there was a back patio, so you could see directly, the 2 acres in the back of our yard and then their farm. And my dad used to always say, like, to my mother, like, why are those lights? Why are there car lights at like 2 in the morning in the back of this yard? And come to find out, they probably were like chopping the plants down and getting ready to harvest them. So years later, when we found out that they got busted for acres of weed, we were like, well, that explains those lights in the middle of the night with no reason.
Oh, wow. So how did your parents kind of talk about cannabis growing up?
So my dad, so it was very interesting because my father was just as cool as a cat. He as soon as he graduated high school, he moved out to California. My parents were older, so he was all part of the hippie movement. Spent a lot of his time in Haight-Ashbury, where that's where the hippie movement was first established. So with my sister and I being young, he would always tell us about his different experiences with drugs. And the
Yeah.
one thing he would just always say is, don't use anything, but you can always use cannabis. I have no problem with you using cannabis. So
But
that was
away
cool.
from all the other stuff out there.
Yeah, he was like, stay away from cocaine. He's like, I remember doing cocaine and then like looking on the shag carpet for like pieces of it because I was getting hooked on it. I was like, all right, duly noted, won't try that. And then you have my mom who when we were coming up, she was a English teacher, and then she, throughout her career became has a doctorate in education, was a principal for a number of years. So it was a complete opposite of my father, where she was like, say no to drugs, the whole DARE campaign. Like, if you use drugs, your brain is going to melt. You're going to be a failure in life. So it was interesting.
Even though she went through the same Haight and Ashbury kind of experience?
Oh no, no, my mom didn't. It was only my
Oh,
father
okay.
who
Okay.
went through that experience when he graduated high school. It wasn't until, a decade later that he met my mother. But it was always so funny. My mom, I remember vividly times she'd be like, my dad's nickname was Smitty, so she'd be like, Smitty, you're high, go to bed. So,
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Oh, they sound like they have just such a cool relationship. That's awesome to have
yeah, it was
that kind of
definitely a unique
parental.
dynamic.
Yeah, totally, totally. Oh my gosh, I got like just say no to drugs. Don't talk about it. This is not okay. Only bad people use drugs. Yeah, I got only the negative aspect of it.
You
But yeah,
too,
so
huh?
when did you start using cannabis?
I actually started when I was 14. And I'll never forget it because there was a party in our neighborhood. I won't mention his name, but a good friend of mine that I grew up with. There was a party in our neighborhood, and he had an older brother, and his older brother had actually dropped out of high school to follow the Grateful Dead. So so that just goes to show you the colorful personalities I was around and involving cannabis and mushrooms. So he had a house party. His brother was there, and that was the first time I saw weed in person, and the first time I consumed it. And like most, I was like, I don't know if I'm high or not, but something definitely feels different, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
But that was my first encounter. And then after that, I was off to the races.
Hey, so you started out and then it was just now I'm going to use this pretty regularly, or was it,
No, I wasn't
how did it fit
regularly
into your
because
life?
I didn't really have direct access to it like that. So it would be like whenever my friend's brother would be home, he would give us some. So I'd say, maybe once a month or twice a month when I was like 14, we were doing it. And then, once I got my driver's license, then, like most kids, your whole life changes. And now I had access. So it was like at that point, I was driving to DC and just buying weed off the corner is how it started.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And so how did that were you able to talk to your dad about that, or how were you kind of navigating that world and figuring out how you wanted to use it?
These are great questions. It's really tickling my memory because I remember coming home, stoned a lot of times, and my mother would be like, "Oh, Otha, are your allergies bothering you again?"
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah, because
Oh.
I had really bad allergies growing up, and so she just thought it was allergies, and my dad would just like give me this smirk, like I know what's really going on, and so. So it worked out. Like she never really, because I always did pretty well in school. So she saw everything on the up and up. So she never had reasons to question it. But, when it was my father and I in our alone time, he was like, so what are you smoking? Let me see what you got. So it was cool.
That's awesome. Was he approving of the cannabis you found yourself in?
Yeah, he was approving it. And he always took a sample.
Oh my gosh. There was a point when I was in grad school and I had lived in Colorado and Washington at that point. And I went back home and my brother showed me the weed that he got in Michigan and I was just horrified. I'm like, I'm sorry, what have you been smoking over here? This is really bad. Like, you're not smoking good weed. I guess I've been smoking some good weed over here because I can see that and it's not good.
Yeah, I remember that too. And back then it's not like it is today where you have so many different strain names and stuff like that. I mean, there were no strain names really. It was just what was it, KB, Kind Bud, and then you
OG.
had mids, and that was
Yeah.
it.
Oh my God.
And then
Mid.
I really thought I was doing something when like people started selling hydro and you really thought you were just like the coolest kid on the campus because you got hydro and it came in these glass jars. I was like, oh my God, this is in glass. This has got to be the best cannabis out there.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing how things have shifted so much from just being like I'm just smoking whatever the person I'm buying weed from at the time has access to to now going into a dispensary and just being overwhelmed by the options that are available. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%.
Oh my.
It's a whole new world and something, in all my years, I never thought we'd be at a point where cannabis be legal like it is now.
Oh my gosh, it's like it's the wild wild west. It's just so we're still at this really cool beginning stage. It feels like it's already expanded so much, but we're really just the beginning, and you're part of moving that forward, of helping people figure out exactly what to look for, and to get curious about their own use. And so that's what I really appreciate about your app. But before we get into that, I want to ask you about how you've been able to use cannabis with exercise.
I never really got into fitness until, unfortunately, my father passed away. So when he passed away, that's when I really got into fitness because I had to find a way to channel my anger, my grief, my emotions, and exercise was a true benefit for me. It's something I really gravitated towards when he passed away because, I would just go into the gym and, it's like everything else just melts away. You don't think about anything. It really became my form of meditation, really, especially running. Like I run, 5K every day. And so that's what really got me into exercise. And I never coupled it with cannabis until, I'd say 6, 7 years ago is when I really started to, bring both of those worlds together.
Yeah, that's awesome that you found exercise to be really helpful in that time period, because people can turn to way more problematic ways to cope with situations like that. That's awesome that you found exercise in that moment.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And so, like I'm in Massachusetts right now, meeting with some of our dispensary partners and doctors. And the place where I stay is a really good friend of mine. She's a nurse practitioner, and she lives in what is called Jamaica Plain, so right outside of Boston. And there's this beautiful pond that I circle around. I do my runs every morning. And today was just, with the fall leaves changing and, the
Amazing.
crisp winter air. It was incredible. And I took a 5 milligram 1-to-1. So that's, equal parts THC, equal parts CBD. And I didn't get the best time. Maybe I didn't get as much sleep last night, but I still was able to run those 2 miles, those 3 miles in 7 minutes flat consistently. It was good. I love cannabis as part of my recovery and as part of like my prior workout secret sauce, if you will.
Yeah, so tell me more about that. Like, how do you, if it's an edible, one of my problems is that I never run long enough to have an edible. I would have to take an edible and then sit for a while, do something else, and then go for my run to be able to feel those effects. Because I would go for a run and then the edible would kick in. Basically, my runs are never long enough to actually have the effects of an edible. But how do you kind of work on timing that? How have you figured that out?
Yeah, so as we all know, cannabis is different for everyone in terms of the time of effect, how long that relief lasted. So for me, I dialed it in using my app, right? And I've come to find out that when I use any milligram, but really that 5 to 10 milligrams, it'll typically take about 40 minutes before it takes effect.
Mhm.
So I get up in the morning, I make sure that like, all right, if I'm going to plan on running within an hour, I'll take it an hour prior. So like after I brush my teeth, I'll eat the edible, drink water, get really hydrated, and then, go on my run so that by the time I'm, starting that run, I'm already feeling medicated. And it took a while because sometimes I tried just THC only, and I realized that that made me too cerebrally high, and led to a lot of muscle cramping. So I was like, all right, that's not going to work. Even tried lower doses of THC, that didn't work, but I really found the sweet spot within that 5 to 10 milligram of equal parts CBD and THC. Yeah, and at the end of the day, it just
Yeah.
takes away the joint pain. Like I don't feel any joint pain, no knee pain, no hip pain. So it's just like, having my joints, WD 40'd up.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing for people where pain is a major barrier to exercise, but we know that exercise is so important for literally every system of the body. then how can we help to have people take away that barrier to exercise, because it will ultimately be really good for you to move your body than to be sedentary.
Yeah, and then like anything, your mind controls every aspect of your body. And so with my mind being more relaxed, I'm not hearing myself say, stop, you're tired already. Stop. We don't want to do this anymore. This is not fun. You're killing us. So it just puts everything in a nice Zen mode, Zen for me mentally, and then physically. Like I said, I feel like the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz. Just oil up the joints and we're ready to go.
That's such a great way of explaining that. Yeah, one of the things that we've been talking about within the cannabis and exercise research group is how can we better describe just being high with exercise, because I think the best way that people have done it so far is the folks out of University of Colorado. They have three 10-point scales where it's just overall, how high are you? And then the next one is how physically high and then mentally high.
Mm.
And so that's the most precise way we've done it so far in the research world. But what are some other, I don't know, better descriptors you think that people could use in the research world, or that you're even using with your app?
I mean, some of the descriptors I use is, hazy. Like when I feel like I'm a little too hazy mentally, it's like I'm just not focused. I'm a little just scatterbrained, just medicated and not chasing racing thoughts to a degree. When it comes to physical and how I describe that, I more so just talk about like feeling loose,
Yeah.
um, relaxed, things of that sort is really how I categorize it. But and I think the ones that the medical world and research are using are definitely appropriate, but everyone's going to describe it their own way.
Exactly. And that's the part that I think we're going to get better at doing, as long as we have more qualitative research in addition to quantitative research, having more interviews with people to hear how do they describe the high that they're feeling. Even talking about, like, I mean, in terms of the physical high, when you're saying that it helps you just feel loose, that would be in the physical high kind of realm. But when I think
Mhm.
about physical high, I think about whether it's like couch lock or not. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so even the descriptors of these things, people can take them to mean different things as well.
Yeah, totally. Because I was just thinking about it as we were talking. Like, yeah, whenever I feel like, all right, this is not the right buzz, I feel hazy. But then when I have that right blend, super focus is one of the words I always use to describe how I'm feeling too. And it's
Whoa.
really been fascinating just to see how, people who utilize Tetragram, how they are very descriptive with their feelings as well. It's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've been kind of talking around Tetragram a little bit here, and so let's go ahead and just go into it. Tell me more about Tetragram and how people can use Tetragram.
Yeah, so Tetragram is a HIPAA compliant mobile app that I developed specifically to really empower cannabis consumers because, taking me for example, I built it because I realized even though I've been using cannabis ever since I was like 14 years old, when I walked into a dispensary, I had that WTF moment. It's just like I do not know anything about terpenes, cannabinoids that people are talking about in the dispensary. I've never seen cannabis outside of flour and just someone putting it into, a brownie mix, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I was just completely overwhelmed, Whitney. And I was like, if I'm having this experience as someone who's, had a long relationship with cannabis, I can only imagine how someone like my mom, who would never use it, but if she did, how she might feel, or someone who hasn't used it since the 70s, how they may feel when they walk into a dispensary. Because it's always been utilized as a medicine. It's just that we didn't know enough to really home in on that. So that's why I wanted to create Tetragram. So it's as I mentioned, a HIPAA compliant app that people can download from Apple, from Google, and it essentially gives them the ability to journal their experiences with the cannabis products they consume. So that over time they can look back at these journal entries and be like, oh, so that's when I felt really good for my run. What did I use? How much did I use? And then more importantly, what did that product consist of?
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's so important because it's something that I've been going through as well, of figuring out what kind of cannabis products actually work for me. Because as we were talking about earlier, when you're not in a regulated market and you just buy whatever weed is available to you, that's just whatever weed I would pair with exercise. It didn't matter. I just saw it as, oh, I'm just gonna smoke some weed and go climbing, and it didn't really matter what kind of weed it was. But now that I've had more of an opportunity to test out different strains and figure out how do they actually impact my performance, where I've now realized that some strains I will never pair with climbing again because they make me feel too afraid, and then other strains where I it's awesome. It's a great experience. I feel really strong and creative, and so it's been a really cool process of figuring out what actually works. Because I think that one of the things that happens as cannabis has become more legal and more socially acceptable, which is still growing in that way, but as it has become more socially acceptable, there's more people who are talking about it as this is a product that's just going to cure everything. This is the miracle drug, and it's just it's not that. It's not for everyone,
Or
and even certain strains and certain products are not for everyone too. And so I think it's really awesome that you're helping people, that you created this app to help people figure out how is this actually impacting you.
Yeah, 100%. And to that point, like I tried a new product a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if I shared this with you, but sometimes I'll do like running at night because I think it's just amazing. And then I don't know if I
I
shared
think
this
that's
with
so funny. Oh my gosh, I would never do that. That's
really.
yeah, it just seems like so scary. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you use the appropriate term too, because so I was running at night. I live in this big planned neighborhood, so it's like, I'm never leaving the neighborhood when I run. So I feel comfortable, feel like I'm safe. But and I've run thousands of times at night, but I use this one particular strain. It wasn't a gummy, it was actually, flower. And I ran and I got so freaking paranoid. Like I thought I was hearing footsteps behind me. I was like, all right, we're done. Not doing this run. So
Ah,
to your point, like there's so many different cultivars or strains out there. It's a trial and error process. But then, more importantly, one of the things that was dear to me when we created Tetragram was giving patients the ability to not only journal their experiences, but share that with other people. So we had this whole community portion in Tetragram so that people can learn from each other and be like, oh, if you try this for sleep, well, maybe I'll try it for sleep because it at least is giving me a head start into determining if that's going to work best for me.
absolutely. And I think one of the most powerful things within those groups is, when I go to a dispensary in California versus if you go to a dispensary on the East Coast, the products are going to be different. You might see the same strain names sometimes, but it's I really like how you're collecting more than just the strain name. You're seeing about cannabis profile, what are the terpenes, what's the THC to CBD, any other cannabinoids, what farm does it come from? I mean, the fact that you're gathering that people can learn from all of that information is really powerful. I think that's really a cool way of looking at it outside of just strain name.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, a strain name really doesn't tell you anything. Like you got some of these strain names called Chernobyl, for example. Why would anybody want to try that, right? So,
Ugh.
but it's more so to your point, like looking at what are the terpenes, what are the cannabinoids, THC levels, and so forth. Because there's multiple people across the country growing the same product and giving it the same name. But we all know that they're going to be inherently different given the soil that they're grown in, the amount of light, if it's indoor, outdoor. So, understanding all that down to that level is really where it's refreshing to see the consumer starting to gravitate towards, as
Yep.
opposed to just looking at THC content. Because as I always tell people, that's the last thing you should be looking at when you buy product.
Yeah. And I think it's been interesting to see how products are marketed as well, and what's even on the packaging in as well. Because so in Colorado, I noticed that when I bought some joints in Colorado, on the package it didn't have anything about the terpene profile, but it had what are the heavy metals found in the soil, and it was like, why would I want to smoke this? This is
Right?
weird. And all you were basing your decisions on were, oh, this kind of sounds like a cool name, or oh, I kind of like more of a sativa dominant or whatever. And it's just not as precise. And the fact that it's different in different states makes it even more complicated. And so I think that having a place where all of this data is stored, and you just do really cool things with the data to help people out and figure out exactly what is good for different people.
Yeah, I mean, because Tetragram is a chameleon in that sense. Like, of course, our primary focus is helping the consumer make better purchase decisions, but ultimately, all this data that we collect, completely de-identified, anonymous information, is really telling of, what is the potential impact, the efficacy of cannabis use, and we look to uncover that by looking at, again, not the strain name, but more so the terpenes, the cannabinoids, in conjunction with the consumption method and dosing amount that is going to equal X.
Yep.
And so that's our ultimate goal. And that really empowers the industry, because if you look at it from a dispensary's perspective, I can't remember what the exact number is, but I think they said like 83% of consumers make purchases based upon the bud tender's recommendation. But yeah, they don't have enough information. So they have a huge vital role in whether or not that's going to meet that customer's expectations, because chances if they make a bad recommendation and that person has a bad experience, then that keeps that negative stigma alive about cannabis use. So there's so many ways, to your point, like we can drive this data to really uncover the benefits, but more so educate the industry as a whole.
Yeah. One of the things that I hear from people out here is that a lot of the strains that people are producing out here that are less than 20% THC are just not being bought up by the dispensaries, because people are asking for more higher THC strains, and it's all that ego going into, oh, I like the highest, I have a 36% THC strain, and it's like there's one strain out here, number 26 from Canna Country, that is 16% THC, and that will get you just so high, and that THC percent isn't, it makes
Doesn't mean anything.
It makes it seem like, oh, I'm not going to get that high from this thing, but no, it's all the other aspects of that plant and everything else that creates it, that makes it so potent.
Yeah, and that's what drives me nuts about the industry. I mean, the first point that you made was how labels vary so much, and through time there will become standardization, so that one, the standardization needs to take place with the lab, whereas they need to make sure that they're testing for all the same terpenes and cannabinoids as their neighboring state. And then more importantly, that information needs to be readily available to the consumer on the packaging, which, here in Massachusetts, they only tell you the THC content, whatever CBD content, and that's it. Whereas back home in Maryland, I get full access to all the terpene and cannabinoid information because it's legislatively made possible. Yeah. So we got a ways to go, but my best strains are always between that 14 to 18, 19% with like 2% terpenes, and I'll put that up against any 36% whatever any day of the week,
Yeah.
But it just irritates me because the industry, the people who really are, controlling the majority of the industry, these MSOs, they understand that there's customer ignorance because they don't, only thing they know is THC, so they're using it as the driving force. But, all things come to an end over time.
Yep, exactly. And it takes more data and more education that is so important right now. All right, and I want to be respectful of your time, and I know that you're kind of out of town right now, so and I told you this was only going to be half an hour, but here we are at
you know how you and I can go. We just keep talking.
Oh my God, I know. I mean, it's hours. And I know that we'll continue to have more conversations as well. But yeah, so is there anything else that you would like to talk about or share?
Yeah, I just encourage people to be patient with cannabis, understand that it is a process in terms of figuring out what's going to work best for you. It took me about 6-7 months, to be honest with you, just trying different products. So I just encourage people to hang in there, do your own research as well. And of course, I encourage everyone to download Tetragram and utilize that as a way to empower their journey with cannabis until they find that right product. So, please download the app today on the App Store or the Google Play Store. And again, it's HIPAA compliant. We don't ask for your first or last name, so all your information stays completely secure.
Yes.
And I just want to thank you today, Whitney, for your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, it's always great.
To working with you.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about I'm constantly thinking about research ideas, and now and having more communication with you, I'm really excited for the ways that we can use the Tetragram app to help to get more research out there and about how people are using cannabis and to really get real about it. I think that one of the things that we talked about another time was don't just give every cannabis product a 5 out of 5,
Right.
like not everything is a 10 out of 10. And so actually getting real and getting really specific about how cannabis impacts you. And it's a learning process, and it can be an expensive learning process when products are like $50 each, and then you get it and then you realize it doesn't work for you. That's like a heartbreaking aspect of
Totally
the learning process. In the future, I would love to have products that are like a sample pack, where people can test out different things. Because if someone has a lot of experience with cannabis, that's a whole nother realm. But for people who are just had some kind of injury or something like that, and they're curious about it, but don't quite know what to do, what do you do? And so you go into a store, and as you say, you just do whatever the bud tender tells you to. But it would be so nice to have a system for people to figure out what is good for you. And I think the Tetragram app can really help people figure out that system. And so we can work together to get that out into the world.
Yeah. Like I say, it takes a village. So, I've always appreciated you for supporting me, believing in, the value that we're bringing to the industry. But, that's, again, another reason why I knew building in the ability for people to share their experiences with others. This really helps elevate that experience because, my mom, real quick, my mom saw on there that there were like certain people who were her age group that were using cannabis. And then, that made the conversation a lot easier, a lot more digestible. So, we're all in this together, and we're all looking for that right relief. So this takes time.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness. Okay, we didn't even get to your own experience with that.
It's all good. That's episode 2.
All right, perfect. All right, we'll do that for episode 2. And then, I'm really excited to continue to work with you and continue these conversations. I think what you're doing is really important.
Yeah, likewise. Let's keep getting that research and exercise and cannabis going.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more, you can follow me on Instagram at Exploring Cannabis and Exercise or at Dr. Ogle, or you can visit my website at whitneyogle.com. If you want to support this podcast, you can sign up for Patreon at patreon.com/exploring cannabis and exercise. This podcast was produced by Haley Montowski, and the music used on this podcast is called Bonfire Cauliflower, created by Isaac Joel. Make good choices out there.